In the 1930s, some families were reduced to some very basic meals, like potato soup stretched with water, or poor man's meal. But for many folks, there were times when food was plentiful, just not the kind of food they wanted. To make things all around more pleasant, many cooks used a variety of substitutions to round out their recipes. Here are 12 of the substitutions that folks during the Great Depression used to get by when times were tough. Convincing coffee. The wheat product postum was used to either simulate coffee or was sometimes added to real coffee in order to make the most of one canister of coffee grounds. Postum is made from toasted wheat germ and molasses for a hearty roasted flavor. Likewise, some people used chicory root to make a coffee-like drink, a trick that had been in use at least since the Civil War in the US, and in Europe as far back as 1808 or earlier. Chicory and coffee are still sold together in many places. No tea? No problem. Today we think of hot water with lemon as a soothing beverage for someone with a cold or a flu, but in the 1930s it was the closest thing to tea that many people would have had access to. Meat extenders. As an extender for small amounts of meat, or sometimes to replace meat entirely, beans were sometimes used in the making of meatloaf. Pork cracklins. Baked into a flour mixture on a cookie sheet in the oven or in a Dutch oven over an open fire, pork cracklins add a nice crunch and flavor to the bread-like mix. Mock apple pie. Instead of sliced apples, this pie uses Ritz crackers to make the texture seem like apple pie. What an amazing use of what they had on hand. Good old buttermilk. Buttermilk was drunk instead of regular milk, since it was a byproduct of making butter at home and was essentially free. It was also used in baking to add leavening, a trick we still use today with pancakes. And sometimes dairies even gave away buttermilk for free because it was a waste product, which was a real boon to any poor family. Who needs lunch meat? Beans were sometimes eaten in sandwiches instead of meat. If that sounds strange, then just remember that the Great Depression was the era of the onion sandwich, the ketchup sandwich, the liver sandwich, and the butter and sugar sandwich. Better than butter. As in the cowboy days of the Old West, lard or drippings were slapped on bread when butter wasn't available. Bread is bread. As had been done for centuries since the settlers first came from Europe, cornbread was used instead of white bread. Corn flour back then was often cheaper and more abundant than wheat flour was. Catching victuals from the wild. Small game like groundhogs, rabbits, squirrels, and raccoon had to be used instead of meat from the butcher. This option was open to those who had the geography and the skill to hunt or set up traps. Making stock. Chicken feet were sometimes used to make stock instead of regular chicken, or bones or bouillon, since they were considered waste and could be obtained for cheap or free. Could it be chicken? People who lived in cities didn't always have access to a wide variety of foods. Shortages meant that sometimes they simply didn't get to eat apples or chicken or whatever they liked. Wives came up with city chicken as a solution. This dish was made from ground meats, often beef or pork, which were then shaped like chicken legs and breaded and deep fried. It was not unlike chicken fried steak, which is now a classic dish.